Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday evening on October 2nd, and it's just me tonight, Brent, but I've got quite a great interview, long overdue. Many of you have heard me reference needing to get Peter on the pod, but we're going to bring Peter Corbyn in from the Brunswick Non-Profit Housing Association in just a second. But as always, we are in Mennequist on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, the Pascatomakati, and the Wolastoq people. And it's like I said, Thursday, October 2nd, and I just had a really great day on job site today, and it kind of jogged my memory. So if you're looking at the screen here, if you're watching on Rogers TV or on YouTube, you can see I'm wearing some swag tonight. We got Blue Collar Collective. Gonna give a shout out to my friends who are involved with that. Blue Collar Collective is a great initiative that has brought together a number of people who work in the trades and in construction industry overall around getting support to folks who are working in that sector around mental health, peer-to-peer support, mentorship. If you're familiar with the construction industry, you know that it can be a very at times magnanimous, as well as at times looked down upon, and sometimes for good reason, right? We construction workers do have a reputation of catcalling and things like that, which is on us. That's on us to own up for. But you know what? There's no shortage of hardship that comes in that industry, whether you're somebody who's just starting a company, whether you're your own boss and you're running a construction company, everything from landscaping to heavy machinery to carpentry. It's a hard slog. There's not many other industries that are like it. And there's a lot that rides on it, right? If you mess up someone's job, it's everything they see, and you're every problem that they have. I'm just gonna push my mic back here a little bit. It's coming in a little hot. Anyway, so shout out to Blue Collar Collective, Alex Nickerson, my buddy who started that. I want everybody to go check them out. At some point tonight, I'll get a banner loaded up and I'll share a link. Just shout out to that initiative. Started here in St. John, New Brunswick wide. Like I said, Alex has really done a great job at getting a brand together that supports initiatives to help folks going through a hard time in the construction industry specifically. So with that in mind, and without further ado, I am going to bring in Mr. Peter Corbyn from the New Brunswick Non-Profit Housing Association. Welcome, Peter.
Good to be here. Thanks, Brent.
Yeah, thanks for being here. This is, like I said to you when we were starting out, long overdue. I think I've talked about, I know when we went to watch the original talk that you did at the conference a couple of years ago, really did a number on that. Joanna and I, who couldn't be here tonight, we have been talking about housing since we started. Obviously, it's a piece of my bailiwick and passion, and for anybody, but Joanna's too, and it's a hot topic. So it's about time we had somebody can come and to balance out the perspective and to offer new insights. So with that in mind, I wanted to start really just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and where you're at now. And how did you end up where you're at now? Like, what does that track look like? You've obviously been involved with a number of things, but tell us a little bit of that background.
Well, funny you ask that, because when you talk to a lot of housers, we call ourselves housers, right? Getting housing built in Canada. And if you ask that question of 100 different people in this sector, you'll get 100 different journeys and 100 different answers, which is kind of cool. It's not like anyone grew up and said, gee, I want to get nonprofit housing built, right? We all have to cross this challenge in different ways. So I've got a unique background. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade and education. I graduated from UNB in 1987. So 38 years ago. The odd thing is, although I graduated from engineering, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an architect. And long story short, I ended up in engineering. So the first 15 years of my career, I spent actually in the automotive industry, 12 of that in Ontario. 8 years I spent making car seats for Ford, GM, Chrysler, and great sector to learn innovation, because a lot of people don't realize this, but about 80 to 90% of the value of a vehicle is outsourced to a sector that most people don't even know exists. So whether it's the cars, transmission, doors, stereo, whatever. So anyway, I spent 8 years making car seats, and then in the late 90s, I became the environment director with the Canadian Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. So that's where I got my sort of taste for association work, and I loved it. And I loved that job. It was in Toronto. That's how I came back to New Brunswick in 2000, almost on the button. I taught at the community college in St. John for 4 years, and loved that. Various engineering courses. I was like, for some people may go back to the commercials, let's get Mikey, he'll eat anything. I was like, let's get Peter.
Mikey, I think he likes it. Yeah,
exactly. I was like, let's get Peter, he'll teach anything. So anyway, enjoyed that. But then in 2007, I had an interesting twist in my journey. I was fortunate enough to work with Al Gore. You may recall back in 2006, he released the Inconvenient Truth documentary about climate change, the climate crisis. And that I had been an advocate and have been an advocate for about the climate crisis and energy efficiency since 1992. And anyway, long story short, so we watched that movie in the theater back 19 years ago. And within a month or so of that movie coming out, I happened to hear on the radio that he was looking to train 1,000 people to do that presentation live in their own communities.
It was huge. And I just have to say, like, I've heard you talk about that before, and it was such a pivotal moment in it. It was like, for me as a kid coming in through high school and at university when that came out, it's hard to think of something that compares to how transformative that talk was with governments and corporations and the public. It was huge.
100%. And what I got from that, so what happened process-wise is he put the call out basically to recruit 1,000 people to do the same his presentation in their own communities. And I was one of the 21 Canadians out of the first 1,000 that in classes of 200, we got to go down to Nashville and spend 2 days with the former vice president of the United States and, more work on the science and communications and such. And the deal at the time was you did 10 presentations as a volunteer back in your community, and then sort of you did your deed for what Vice President Gore had put together. So I came back to New Brunswick in January of 2007, and before I knew it, I did 55 presentations for 12,000 people.
Wow.
In about a 5-month period. And it stuck with me for a couple of reasons. Number one, with content, people now can watch what they want, when they want, right?
Yeah.
And true then, but back then, dating myself, you had to go to Blockbuster on, on Friday night and not go like this. But the other thing that struck me that I thought was really impactful is the message was taken to people who aren't necessarily preaching to the choir already. So if you're in a position, or if you're interested in learning more about the climate crisis, you'd go rent the movie, right?
Yep.
But if you're doing these presentations in conferences or community groups or schools, things like that, there are a lot of people in the audience that may not choose that content to learn about. So I found that very powerful, and it personalizes the message. So I learned from that, and I'm sure we'll get later to the presentation I did last year, kind of patterned after that model. So yeah, so that got me to 2007. So and that led to an interesting journey from 2007 to 2016. I was a partner in an IT company called Green Nexus, and we were kind of a white label green Facebook, for lack of a better term.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, our first client, actually, our first project was with CBC with George Stroumboulopoulos when he had his talk show.
Strombo Show.
Yeah, Strombo. And so we got to hang with Strombo a bit. So in 2008-09, Strombo on his show on CBC ran an initiative called 1 Million Acts of Green, which was essentially every night there'd be a guest on Strombo's talk show, and at break, commercial break or whatever, he'd ask your guest, so what's your act of green? David Suzuki. And David Suzuki would say, my act of green is, I bought a Prius. So, and then Strombo would look at the TV and say, okay, Canada, what's your act of green? And then go to 1millionactsofgreen.com. So Anyway, our company did the back end for 1 million acres of green. So I was the human carbon calculator for this show.
Oh man, wow.
Yeah, we actually had about 1.8 million acres of green accumulated over from October to June. And from that, we ended up doing the sort of a white label software version of that for corporate clients around North America. And anyway, we did that until 2016. And I went on my own as a consultant, mostly in the green tech, clean tech space. And then around 2018 or so about 7 years ago, I was asked to do a study on developing smart cities or smart communities. How do we use technology to enhance social, environmental.
That's where you and I met.
That is correct. Yes, exactly.
Yep.
So that was a great opportunity. I traveled the province before COVID and talked to community leaders like yourself about what technology can do to make a difference. And I got responses back like green technology, green power, adapting to climate change, economic development, tourism, internet access in rural areas, transportation in rural areas. But the one thing that kept popping up, especially in smaller communities, was housing, especially for seniors. And this is before COVID. That's before real estate kind of went crazy.
Bonkers, yeah.
Yeah, so it just struck a chord with me. And kind of like based on the experience I had to that point in time and my interest in designing, building housing, that somehow led me in about 5 years ago or so into working on contract with the Non-Profit Housing Association and ultimately as the executive director about 2 years ago. So it's been an interesting journey, but I share this online quite a bit. I love my job. I joke that it took 35 years to find my dream job. Call me slow.
Hey, but on the nose, I would say, like, it's such an interesting background because, when I think back to what you and I, when we first met up at the Smart Cities conference in Fredericton,
yep.
And I think you came down here for a session too.
Correct.
But up there, our group in the south end of the city of St. John at the Tool Library really was just in its beginning phase. And we were also struck by the housing issue, right? Like that was the whole point for us was, how are we going to fix these abandoned buildings in our neighborhood that are causing such blight and such flight of people and investment and connection. And we landed on a tool library as a solution to try to pilot and do. And you were very receptive, but at that time, you weren't focused as much on housing. You have this crazy background. So before we get into the housing piece, like you've got this environmentalist background, you've got automotive sector background. What are the connections that you see that are important to make from that background, or what helps you make connections to this industry now with some of those perspectives?
That's a great
putting you on the spot.
No, all good. No, it's a great question. So automotive experience, this is going back into the 1990s.
Yeah.
So most people have heard of the term just-in-time delivery, right? So not much inventory. It doesn't matter if you're selling chocolate bars, beer, or iPhones or cars, right? So when General Motors or Ford says, okay, my Ford F-150, I want 10 seats. Now I want 10 brown and 4 leather or whatever. There wasn't much room for inventory or time. So you had to be really, you always had to be innovative in making sure you were delivering the parts. And I remember there was basically a policy. It varied a bit between the OEMs or like the Ford, GM, Chrysler, and Toyota. And they basically had a policy that if you were down for about 12 hours for whatever reason, you had to let them know. And if you took them down because you didn't have parts, they would actually charge you back roughly $1 million an hour. That was back in the 90s. I don't know what it is now, but like $1 million an hour. So wow. That's pressure, right?
Yes, there is.
So that was one aspect, was being able to fix things with duct tape and strip ties, right? So to be creative like that to get product out the door. That was one aspect, was to be innovative, but also innovative in the context of the pressure that, believe it or not, and again, this is back in the 90s, but when you got in a contract with Ford or Toyota or Honda to deliver 250,000 sets of seats a year, they basically paid you less every year for 4 years. So you had to figure out how to make money where you're actually selling less of a product or less sales and to
Right.
make that margin. So you're constantly having to innovate, which means eliminating waste. It means improving processes, and it means, like I said, innovative and improving processes, and trying to figure out 100 different ways on how to get better product out the door safer and quicker. So I'd say from the automotive sector, definitely innovation and the need to innovate because your customers demanded it. You did not have a choice. So that'd be the automotive space. But while I was in automotive, my environmental and energy efficiency hat kind of peaked because and about 33 years ago, I was put in a position to actually, believe it or not, create my own job within this billion-dollar company. Seriously, I was running. This sounds really odd, but I was running production line in a plant that had about 380 employees, and I was making about 40 to 50,000 headrests and armrests a week. And there were 5 production lines in this building. And my boss, the plant manager, said, "Peter, I want to let you know that someone else has taken over your job, but we don't want to lose you. So you got 2 weeks to come up with a new job for yourself." So I'm like, okay, great. Now what? So what I actually ended up doing, this is in 1992 at the age of 27 or 28, I actually created the first employee energy awareness program for industry in Ontario in 1992. And I wanted to do 3 things. I wanted a metric attached to what I did. I don't like waste. Waste drives me nuts. And I wanted to improve my public speaking skills. So hence I actually came up with, and I got the support of the company to create this energy efficiency program where we engaged employees in basically a suggestion program to help identify energy savings opportunities. So instead of being engineers walking around looking to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, someone in maintenance would say, well, put a motion detector in the spare parts room. There's like $500 a year saved, right? You do that over.
Right.
So we ended up saving, this particular program ended up saving about $150,000 on $1 million energy bill at 15%. Our total capital investment for that was $10,000. So the return on investment was like that. So that was sort of innovation that rolled into environment and energy. And the other thing that happened while I was doing this work is the particular plant I worked in Woodbridge, Ontario, was basically the poster child for all things wrong environmental.
Low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, it was an older plant. It used to be a cotton mill back in the day, like back in the 30s and 40s, and the creek behind it was called Rainbow Creek because of the chemicals that poured into the river to make it look like a rainbow. So anyway, we had underground storage tanks and PCBs and you name it. And I had to get rid of all that stuff about the same time. So that was sort of my environmental hat that got into, work with the association, basically in the late 90s, greening the automotive supply chain industry in Canada. And so that's where my sort of public speaking, sharing, seeing that when you get people engaged in a process, that if you talk about it right, they will get engaged. And the other thing I learned then as well was you've got to give people an on-ramp of some sort to get them engaged. Like what can someone do to be part of a solution, right? We all have different skill sets. We all have different interests. We all have different energy to put into solving a problem. So the question becomes, what can Joe or Mary or Phil or Sandy do, right?
Yeah.
So that learned that, and then obviously that got kind of ramped up in working with Al Gore in the context of bringing people together in a room and talking about a solution to the climate crisis. Which led to the work with the online work or the Million Acts of Green business model. But even that I learned, 19 years ago. I mean, yeah, we got social media today and people can scroll on their phone and go click, click, click and get the memes and all that stuff. But the reality is at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we need to connect person to person. And we need to look at each other in the eyes and talk about what we can do to solve a problem. Because the reality is, a soundbite here and a soundbite there really doesn't engage people much. Conversations like this do, because they're going to listen to an hour-long conversation instead of like click, click, click.
Absolutely. And this is why we do it. Like this is so the Nbpoli pod's been here for 2.5 years now. We've done, I don't know what episode this is. It's in the hundreds. But we've always aimed at having a nuanced conversation and trying to increase the level of political awareness in the province around some of this so that we can all row in a direction that's going to get us somewhere together rather than a bunch of people rowing in many different directions.
Yep.
And so that brings us to the housing crisis, which is where you leave us off, right? We don't often understand how to get involved with the solution. And I think it's because we have a misunderstanding of a couple of things. And I'll just get your take. But as I look through, right, most people think of a housing crisis and they think, well, there's people living here. There's people here right now who don't have a house. And so they think of the homelessness as the housing crisis. The housing crisis is so much more than that. I'm just breaking it down into what I've heard people describe it as.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. Having more amount of something doesn't always create a relief, right? It's not like there's a shortage of food where if we just had more calories access, we'd be fine. That's not how it works with housing. And so, there's a couple of headlines. I'm looking at 5,322 housing starts in the past 12 months. And this was dated from, I want to say, just 6 months ago. And we've got, headlines that read, MB falling short of the housing starts targets 1 year after launch. We've got over time, I'm looking at these 5-year averages, and it seems pretty stagnant. Like if you look at 2021 at its peak, we were 511 homes. In 2024, in its peak, we're at 706. So walk us through the crisis. Like, if people are on the outside looking in, we've got population growth. We are starting a few more houses. Obviously people understand that rents are increasing, but let's walk through the problem as you see it, from assuming that someone doesn't know anything about the housing crisis or have an opinion about it.
First of all, I would say we likely would not be having this conversation on March 12th, 2020, the day before the world shut down.
Right.
So I think, from my observation, I think there's several contributing factors, but the sort of 2 or 3 big ones. One is obviously population growth, which is needed in Canada. I mean, our birth rate is declining, so we need to embrace immigration to make sure Canada grows, and those
we don't suffer the gray tsunami, as they call it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Which we are, which is there now. So one would be we do need population growth, but obviously with COVID, I think a couple of things happened. I know one of the things that happened was not just immigration from around the world, but as we've all noticed, people moving back or to New Brunswick from Ontario, Alberta, BC. Nothing against any of those people. A lot of them are good friends of mine, but they have that choice to do that. But the reality is, what they have done collectively is increased, the price of housing. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, which I think has probably the most impact, in my opinion, anyway, is the financialization of smaller apartment buildings and multi-unit buildings. So, and where a smaller apartment building, sort of a lower end, might have been like $800 a month rent, $900 a month rent in 2020. You've got 1 or 2 people living in that apartment can afford $800 or $900 a month rent. Now you've got these numbered companies or investors looking at New Brunswick and go, oh wow, I can get that 8-unit apartment building for a few $100,000. They go in and put a coat of paint on it, a couple other things. The rent goes up to $1,400. 3 months later, those tenants, guess where they are?
Moved on.
They're gone. And that to me is, I would say, if you were to take those 3 factors, I would say that would be probably the largest one, or the one with the most impact. And that was explained to me well by the former executive director of Harvest House in Moncton.
Cal.
Yeah, and he had a great point. He said, look, these people didn't choose this life. They were living in an apartment, renting at, say, that $800 a month rent. the rent goes up a few $100, and 2 or 3 months later, they just can't keep up, right? So what happens next? So, and that is where I believe, well, not I believe, I trust and know that what's known as community housing or nonprofit and co-op housing, or basically housing that's provided by the community, is so important for several reasons. One, it's more than just the people we see on the street that are stressed with a housing challenge. Um, if you look at any given point in time, almost in the history of Canada, virtually the lowest 20% of households um, are paying more than 30% of their household income, which is considered affordable. So affordable housing, essentially, I know you ask 10 different people, you get 10 different answers. But generally, if someone's paying more than 30% of their gross income on housing, it's not affordable to them.
Right.
Right. So, and that's what's happened. So that's why, right now, that's why I wear this pin. You'll notice this pin here that says 20%, and I'll put one up to the camera. So this is a call to action pin that both of us in the sector started wearing this year. I have a bunch to hand out to people. But basically what the 20% means is that, like I said earlier, about 4% of all housing stock in Canada is community housing or provided through public housing, co-ops or nonprofits. We need to get that to about 20%, which means essentially increasing the market share about fivefold relative to where we're at now, which, as you can well imagine, is one heck of a challenge.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I've said that number before on here too. People will remember me saying that's really the goal we need, is to get to 20%. As soon as you get 20% saturation, the private sector has to back off. They can't just put the pedal on the neck, or they can't just put the foot on the neck or the pedal on the metal on the rents. There's some competition, and that competition is highly competitive because of the nature of its structure.
Right.
But there's just no option for the leverageability of the private sector is so immense that nonprofits have no firepower to play with, and banks have no mandate to give to them or lend to them, and the government makes the difficulty level too cumbersome and too difficult for people to get into. So you've identified a few pieces there. I think everybody, I'll say something more maritime. Those guys from Ontario, right? As Ricky says off of Trailer Park Boys, right? Like everybody has this story of someone moving over across the street down the road from Ontario, and they don't know anything about the place, and they don't know anything about the province, and there is resentment. And I never encountered that in my entire life. I don't know if you have either, but I've lived in Ontario. I've traveled a lot. I've lived in New Brunswick. I've spent time in Germany. Like, I've never encountered a place that so quickly developed a unifying culture against distaste for a province it had no beef with 6 months prior. But like, it didn't matter if you were at Tim Hortons in St. George or if you were up north, like, everybody was talking about it because everybody was seeing it happen in rapid time, and the news articles coming out about sight unseen purchases. So when you say the financialization and the migration that happened interprovincially that drove up prices, what does that outcome look like in brass tacks? Like, what are the pieces that now have shifted since before that occurred?
Right. I'd say two. One is, the private sector, there's definitely a place for the private sector to provide housing for those who can afford a private sector product, right?
Right.
Well, my analogy to that, again, I like to use the auto industry as an analogy, is, there's a market for a Porsche, right? Mm-hmm. There's a market for an Escalade. There's also a market for a Hyundai Elantra, right? Yep. So there's the place for everyone in the market. The question is, who should be providing that product for the particular market? So, I lived in Ontario for almost 20 years in total. I moved to New Brunswick 25 years ago, bought a house that we could afford, right? And that same home, actually, we sold. My wife and I downsized 4 years ago, and our realtor we didn't sell for the purpose of going, oh, COVID buck, let's go crazy. But we happened to sell at that time for our life journey reason. And our realtor, I remember saying, "You're going to get an offer of this much," and we said, "You got to be kidding me!" And she said, "You will." We did. Holy crap! But I don't think we should. There's two. One is the people that moved from Ontario, and I've got family that have done that in the last 3 years. Great family, I love them. They can live wherever they want to live, right?
Sure.
And that's their right. They can, sell their home in Peterborough or Guelph or Sarnia and buy a house down here for whatever. That's fine. I don't take any ill will against that at all. But my concern is what's happened more on the investment side and housing becoming an investment tool as opposed to a place where people live with dignity. That's where I have a concern, right? If you look at what's happening, for example, in the Toronto condo market right now, it's crashing, right? And people were looking at condos and as investment and pre-buying condos like 500 square feet for $600,000. And then, the market changes, and before you know it, they're taking a bath and thinking they can sell for 800, but it's not worth 400,000, right?
Yeah.
They're not using that space to live and provide housing and dignity. It's basically an opportunity to flip something and make a quick couple $100,000 in a year or two. And I think that's where there's a real challenge, and that's where my concern is with that loophole.
On that point, and I agree with that loophole. I wrote a post a while back talking about the marginal return rate of profit, or how CRA words it a different way. Or Stats Canada words it a specific way, but it's basically the profit margin. And the real estate and leasing sector, this is not construction of housing. This is just the selling and leasing of housing in Canada, is the largest sector in the country by a country mile. It's bigger than oil. It's bigger than the financial sector and the manufacturing sector combined almost. It's pretty astounding. We're the only country where that's true.
I did not know that. Doesn't surprise me. Does not surprise me.
We're the only country of the G7 that leads with real estate and leasing as its number one industry. The problem is when you look at us when you look at how the stats are calculated around the world, a lot of the time they capture the real estate and leasing sector as services sector. So it gets pegged in with a bunch of other things. So it always looks big, like the services sector always looks big. But in Canada, we actually have a separate designation for real estate and leasing, and it's that number one industry. But so I wrote this post, and I didn't know this. I went on Stats Canada, and I found out that in 2004, the marginal profit rate for the real estate and leasing sector, which was still big then, was like 16%. If you think of a company or an industry like, say, engineering, it was like 12.
Right.
When you get down to manufacturing, it's like 8, right? It gets smaller and smaller and smaller as you go down, but they can still be huge, robust industries, but smaller margins. Now, the real estate and leasing sector had a profit margin in 2024 of 34%. So help me here, because I've talked about this a bunch, and I think you're talking about this from a financialization perspective. How do we get from 5 to 20% without completely lambasting the entire generation that has desired to make that profit margin for themselves? Like 20+% over 20 years in increased margin to nearly a 40% rate. Like, how do we kill that? Or do we need to? What do you think? I mean, maybe it's contentious.
That's a really good question and really interesting point. I'm 60 years old, and I remember in middle school, grades 7 and 8, taking shop class.
Yep.
This comes back to what you're doing as well, which is why I applaud you with what you're doing 110%. So I took shop. I learned how to pull wire. I learned how to make a lampshade. I learned how to change oil in a car. I learned how to use these things and this together, right? Which is what you've been working on. And then as the internet came along, I'm old enough to remember this. You maybe when you were younger, governments, I think probably around the world, said, let's take out that shop class and replace it with computers.
Yep.
All right. Because everyone's going to do this. Right. But the reality is you cannot build a house yet with a computer. Well, the 3D printing and stuff like that now, right? But that will come over time. You cannot install a toilet online. No. You can't fix a toilet on it. You need these, right?
Yeah.
So from a skilled trades perspective, and what you've been doing with the work you're doing, which I absolutely applaud, is so important. It's so important to get people engaged in skilled trades. So that's one aspect of it. So, you look at, a lot of friends and maybe yourself as well, you get out of high school, there's peer pressure to go to university and take something, right? And I'm sure you know a lot of people, and I do as well, that went to university, they lasted a year, and then they go, gee, I'm at a university now, what do I do now? And you get a couple of minimum wage jobs, then you may find your way back to community college. And even when I taught there 20 some years ago, the average starting age of an NBCC student 20 years ago was 28 years old. I don't think it's changed. So that's, for the most part, that's 10 years of someone's life lost between minimum wage and making what skilled trades people can earn, right?
That's right. That's a full, hey, you got your seal, you got your own company, by 10 years, it's done. Absolutely.
So that's where, you see that degradation of the role models, of the teachers in schools. So think of who your shop teacher may have been back in the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your shop teachers now don't exist, right?
They're rare, yeah.
So skilled trades to me is pretty well number one we need, right? And that's one of the challenges we have, is it's just building trades, period. But also the support to get that building done. So it's the architects, the engineers, it's the policymakers, it's the zoners, the people who do zoning, planning and stuff. I say this multiple times, and I think I've said it a few times to a lot of people. The reality is here in New Brunswick, with housing, we are deers in the headlight, right? Yeah. Our population grew like that, but we haven't got the collective ability. And it's not just the carpenters, electricians, and the
plumbers,
plumbers. It's everyone that supports what they do to get the housing built. And to me,
I'm blessed if I can get an engineer to show up within 6 weeks. Blessed. And sometimes you get a situation like I just had Jim Holder, who's here in St. John's, structural engineer. I got lucky because I ran into an issue. His stamp drawings didn't show me something. You can be looking at 4 to 6 weeks waiting for a response. Yeah. Just saying, hey, I don't see what the gap is between these two load bearing posts in this one part. Is it the same as over there, or is it different? Like something as specific as that can take 6 to 8 weeks. So I get what you're saying, but I do want to, I want to hone in on something here, because I think I see where you're coming from. Of course, the trade sector, which is going to drive this industry, needs to be improved, and we need to see the kind of the profit margins shift from the financialization aspect to the actual construction aspect. Because yes. I think in this situation, if we were saying, look, the construction industry has a marginal rate of return for a profit margin of 24%, people probably be like, and it's justified. That's good, right? But seeing it on the real estate and leasing piece has always caused me an immense amount of grief, just because you look at what we do in this sector and what we have to work with. The timelines to wait for money to be released from government can be months. You're a nonprofit organization, you're trying to float that. So let's drill into that, because this is your area of expertise. Of course, we have this big behemoth financial sector that has eaten our lunch and caused this problem as one major piece of it, not the entire piece. Like you said, the migration, everything all adds up. Back to that question, how are we going to get to 20% as the nonprofit and community housing collective? What is that track going to look like? Besides trades, because we got that sort of.
Yeah. Cooperation, collaboration, and not all. Some nonprofit housing has a rent supplement attached to it, right? So, for example, if a tenant can only afford, say, $500 a month rent based on the 30%, and the rent is $800, our median market rent rate, that difference of $300 is made up with the rent subsidy. Now, to look at that on the public accounts side of the journal, there was a study done about 2011, about 15 years ago in Canada, that looked at the actual real costs of supporting someone living on the street. And at the time, it was about $55,000 a year, and that's in 2011 dollars. So I wouldn't mind betting it's doubled since then. So
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, it's about $14,000 to house someone. So it's actually costs less to provide housing for people than it does to, put together the policing costs and hospital and healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. So housing makes sense. Housing first makes sense. That's just a line in the sand. Everyone should have a home and somewhere to live in dignity. So that's just number one. If you look at people that live, people in the lower income, either on fixed income or especially seniors on a fixed income, they should not be stressed. They should not be worried about looking after their home. They should be in a safe place. And nonprofit housing, with the motivation of providing affordable housing for someone, as opposed to saying, hey, let's buy this building in 2025 for $1 million, and 5 years from now flip it for 1.5. That does not happen in the nonprofit and co-op housing space.
Yeah, we stabilize.
Correct. The motivation is there to ensure that the people that rent in those apartments or homes are there, and they've got a predictable rent that does not increase much year over year, because the motivation of the owner is much different. The motivation is there to ensure that those individuals or households have an affordable place to live in perpetuity, as opposed to being the potential victims of a potential flip down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crucial, right? There's no question that the initiative behind the nonprofit sector creates a completely different reality in the housing system. But you've done seniors living facilities. You've done missing middle housing. You've done apartment buildings. Been involved with. You've seen them go from infancy as an idea to completion in your role. What do the organizations that get this stuff done? Like, I'm thinking, like, let's think of the federal system as we have it right now. We've got, a new agency coming on, Build Canada Homes.
Yep. We've
got, which I don't think is going to impact New Brunswick, but we can talk about that. But what do those nonprofits have in common? And what does the current landscape look like in trying to get something built? If you're any nonprofit in the province, let's just go from the understanding that you've never done a build before.
Right.
You're not a housing entity yet, but you work with clients that need it and there's no one else to do it. What does that process look like, and what do the successful ones have in common that you've seen?
First of all, there's no question that it's a complex process. So there are several challenges along the way, and the ones that aren't getting it done have Kit Hickey and Housing Alternatives at St. John. Great example. I mean, Kit's been at this for over 40 years, so she's got the experience in the space. Unfortunately, from a challenge perspective, not many people do, because if you look at the inventory of nonprofit and co-op housing in New Brunswick, and for the most part across Canada, most of it was built from the late 70s to the early 1990s, when there was substantial federal investment in housing. So really, historically, you can look back almost 30 years to the early 1990s, where there wasn't much public investment in housing whatsoever. So that creates to be blunt, a glut in the resources to be able to provide nonprofit or community housing, right? Because the skill set hasn't been there the whole time. So for as much as we talk about carpenters, electricians, and plumbers, that same lack of resource is there within every process at all levels of government to provide the funding and the due diligence and such to actually get that housing built. So we're dealing with a system that doesn't have the institutional processes and background to be able to address the growth need that we have. So one of the challenges that our members face. So, for example, the New Brunswick Non-Profit Housing Association, we represent about 170 nonprofit housing and co-op organizations that own and operate about 6,500 units around the province. And they can range in size from places the size of Loch Lomondville and St. John, a few hundred units, to literally a duplex in Packetville. So, 2 units, and you've got a board of directors who are in their 80s, and the chair of that particular board is 84 years old. He's a part-time bus driver, and he's
amazing.
Yeah, seriously, great dude. But he's the one that gets the call when the fridge, it needs to be fixed. Frankly, that is not a sustainable model, right?
Sure not. No.
No, it's not. And what's happening now in our sector, if you look at the 170 organizations and a board, consisting of, say, 5, 6, 7, 8 people roughly per organization, that's about 12 to 1,300 individuals that are volunteer board members of these organizations. Now, last year, we surveyed our members and found that about 32 to 33% of our board members, of those 1,200 to 1,300 people, are 70 and over. A quarter of them are in their 70s, and at the time, 6% of them were in their 80s. Now, a lot of people still have a lot of gas in the tank to provide, what they've done for years as a board member. So there's absolutely no age discrimination here. But at the same time, a lot of those people would like to retire. And in the same survey, we found that about 40% of our board members would like to retire from their board within the next 1 to 2 years. So that means about 400 to 500 people roughly would like to retire from their board. Now, they will all say, I'd like to retire from my board. And then the next thing they will say is, good luck finding new board members.
Yeah,
seriously.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, so you've got that challenge there to engaging younger people. And I mean younger, like 65 and down, right?
That's right.
To get engaged in the sector. So, but the other challenge there is, a high percentage of these members who have been fantastic stewards of these nonprofit housing, units for decades. The reality is they've got the experience in governing and operating, 10, 12, 15, 30 unit nonprofit housing homes, but they don't have experience building new ones.
Right.
So therein lies the challenge there as well. So really what we need to grow this sector is, again, we talk about the carpenters, the plumbers, electricians, but that's true of people that are willing to volunteer to be board members, which is part of the outreach that we're working on. But as well, and again, going back to my automotive days, the processes are so very important. We can't, for as much as we got to talk about the need for this and the need for growth, 100% agreed. But at the same time, we need to develop processes that allow us to grow that quickly as well. So it's complex. There are different pieces, but what we're doing as association strategically is looking each one of those challenges to address them. Like, for example, looking for new board members. We'll be reaching out starting actually this fall, working with professional and business organizations to recruit through different organizations and media and such. But so we've got to find new board members. We've got to work with all 3 levels of government to develop improved processes. And it doesn't mean cut red tape. Sure, it means, making a process more efficient. It's easy to say, let's cut red tape. It's hard to say, let's get in the dirt together and figure out what red tape we can cut, right?
Yeah. A lot of people, when you say cut red tape, they just think you're saying, oh, no more permits.
Yeah, and there's a reason why permits exist. There's a reason why there's National Building Code. There's a reason why we have barrier-free regulations. There's a reason why we need to be energy efficiency. All that has to be baked in. You can't just go to Home Depot, buy a couple 2x4s and some siding and say we got a house, right?
Right.
So there are a lot of challenges. Process is important, and engaging people and giving them an on-ramp to participate is really, really important.
I'm just going to turn my light on here. I see it's getting dark. Holy smokes. There we go. Now I'm lit up like a Christmas tree.
There you
Sorry
go.
about that.
Okay.
That's a good segue, and I wanted to bring up your website here, Peter. I've got a little banner I can bring up. So if you're on Rogers TV, you can see this link. Desperate need of new board members is one piece, and I think this is the thing. Desperation, I don't mean that as a cheap thing. This is a big deal. If you're going to be on a board and you're going to be a part of a housing association, there's never been a better time to try to take on a new project. There's never been more support funding wise. There's never been more support attention wise with groups like Peter's. But start with this, right? Get yourself involved on a nonprofit. If you really want to get involved and you can't swing a hammer, and even if you can swing a hammer, maybe don't, maybe fill some of your other void if you have it, because I know we work some long hours in the trades.
Yeah.
But if you have some time, put it. Never more important to have construction aware people on a board to be able to help get some of these projects across the line, because essentially what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong as we kind of come to a close here,
Yeah.
is we need a bunch more people involved in the organization and in the activity around getting projects like this with our current groups. We need to get them seeing more projects. We need to see more Kitikis. We need to see all these organizations grow and not diminish. And if we're not, if we're not filling that backlog, it doesn't really matter how many carpenters we got, because we won't have any projects to put them on.
Correct. And I believe that people care. I believe that people want to see, people, all other Canadians living in dignity.
Yeah.
And I think what's incumbent upon people like us in the sector, we live it every day, is we need to recruit people to care, and B, give them a path to be part of the solution.
That's great. Well, I won't take any of your time up. I know I'm just going to wrap up with some parting shots, but Peter, it's been great. We're going to get you back, because we didn't get to wrap up all the conversation here. I think there's still some more stuff about the province, what the province is doing, what the federal government is doing, what could be different, how that, there's a lot of ground to cover in this housing chat. So we'll call this part 1, and we'll get you back soon. But thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Tommy, appreciate it.
Okay, my friend.
Take care.
We'll talk soon.
Thanks.
And with that, just a couple of parting shots. I had said to folks earlier in the show, if you want to check out Blue Collar Collective, and if you care about mental health support in the trades, because it's difficult, right? There's not just a lot of hours. Everybody works a lot of hours. It's not that we work harder than anybody else, but the hours we have to put in can fluctuate so much. And it's not just how much you work. It's also the difficulty of the job. And there's a lot of toxic job sites. Let's be clear. Like, as somebody who was trained by a gentleman, I won't name names, but whose favorite thing was to call their new kids the effing idiot. I say that with a bit of a tongue-in-cheek laugh, but it is a reality. There's a lot of toxic job sites, and it can create a really bad culture. Conversely, if you have a positive work environment, you have a good leader on site, a good coach, you can get a lot of work done, and you can have a really stable team that love what they do. So I am not trying to just, bang on the negative parts of the industry, but as Peter said, we get more people interested in this sector. We start filling those backlog positions. The organizational aspect of our nonprofit housing sectors, whether they're cooperatives, whether they're provincial and federal housing, whether it's municipal, would be a dream of mine personally, but we're not there yet. Or even just nonprofit organizations, like many across the province that we have. There's room for you there. We need you on the boards, not just swinging hammers, right? So if we're in this, I think this is a good call to action pod. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I really want to get feedback on this pod, because this was a bit of a different approach that we took, right? You guys have often heard me on here talking about some of these things, and I brought them up with Peter tonight, but we haven't heard from other people. And you see what Peter's working with here. He is somebody who is expected to solve the housing crisis, right? When we think of a housing crisis and you think of things that are going on, who are we expecting to solve it? It's people like Peter, who are organizers of associations, who have the current reality of owning housing assets and the potential reality, if they're well organized, if the volunteers are prepared and equipped, to be able to get new projects on the books, to get that number from 5, from 4, or whatever it was. I think it was 4 that Peter mentioned, to 20, which I've mentioned before. And that's where we need to go. Of course, we need a for-profit sector, a private sector, but community housing needs this kind of win. And so there's a lot of room for all of you to get involved with that. I've got the link here posted below. New Brunswick Non-Profit Housing Association. It's nbpha-alsblnb.org. I know that's a lot if you're listening to it. You can just or Google the Nonprofit Housing Association. And I mentioned this, but I didn't actually put this banner up. Blue Collar Collective, mental health support and construction industry, bluecollarcollective.ca. My buddy Alex Nickerson, shout out to Alex Nickerson for all the work you've done, man. It's pretty rare that you get somebody who breaks through and does something unique and that is needed and gets the support that you've gotten in this sector. I know, we've been on podcasts in Central from people in Upper Canada, as we call them down here. And it's good for you, man. And I want to support you, love what you're doing. And I want all of you who are listening to this to go check them out. We got some swag for sale at the Tool Library. That is a shameless plug because all the proceeds go to Alex's initiative. But also he's got other stuff going on across the province, and we'll have things rolling out this year. Actually, it's been great to see where he's come with that. So anyway, this has been a great week, great chat. Thank you to Peter. Thank you to all of you for listening. Thank you to our Patreon supporters. You know who you are. I loved naming you for a little while there, but a couple of you said, hey, look, can you just stop saying my name? And I said, okay, well, I'm not going to say your names. I'm not going to say anybody else's name either, because I don't want to give credit to some, not others. But I love you all. And Joe and I love you. And Joe and I will be back soon. Joe has a different position now, and then we sometimes do this podcast. It's close to bed, so only one of us can get on and whatnot. And tonight was me, because tonight was housing. A few weeks' time, we've got our friend Jordan Leichnitz, who, if you listen to The Curse of Politics, you will hear Jordan every week. Probably the biggest political podcast next to the Peter Mansbridge podcast in the country. If you're into politics as much as I am, kudos to you. If you're listening to all of these, please tell me. I'd like to know that I'm not the only loser and the only nerd on this. But I listen to every one of them, and I love Jordan. And it's a really important question. What is the role of third parties right now in Canadian politics, New Brunswick, Atlantic Canada? We got 2 guests coming on for that. It is in the book, so I'm going to tell you when it's happening. It is happening on October 21st. And I've got myself, Matt Wynot, who was an NDP political organizer in Nova Scotia and through the federal government, the federal party, in Atlantic Canada. We got Jordan, who's a longtime commentator on the Hurley Burley podcasts, The Curse of Politics, but also somebody who's interviewed all the time by the mainline network. So probably one of our biggest current gets. We've had some big gets in the past, like former cabinet ministers and whatnot from Alberta. But Jordan's certainly somebody who's live on the air quite often and has a lot of interesting things to say at a time when third parties look like they're about to go extinct. It's a very important conversation to have. So tune in for that. We'll be back next week with another pod, probably some hot topics, some mail, some Q&A that you guys have sent to us. For now, I'm signing off.